A city has approximately 14 hours of daylight in June, 10 in December, and 12 in both March and September. The function and graph below represent the number of daylight hours based on the month of the year. Okay, let's interpret what we are looking at. And in the previous problem, it wasn't such a big deal. We could look at this and say, oh, well, these are years, of course. This is the years. And then the function gives us the number of sunspots. So the output is sunspots and the input is years. Well, what's this in this case? We have so many hours of daylight in June, 10 in December, 12 in March and September. The function below graph represents the number of daylight hours based on the month of the year. So I'm going to get an output of daylight hours when I input the month of the year. So in month number 10, I'm going to have 11 daylight hours. All right? In month number 6, I'm going to have 14, which makes sense because they told me that. Okay? So they've also mentioned some things concerning maximum and minimum, which is really helping me figure out things that I can tell from the equation, like amplitude, midline, and those types of things. So I'm going to pretend like all I have is the equation and I don't have too much information. So here's a way that I'm going to begin to kind of interpret this a little bit differently. So using correct units to interpret the period, amplitude, and midline of this function. So let's go ahead and start with the period. And the period is 2. Let's put units on this. Daylight hours. What does that mean? That's an odd wording of a sentence. So from the midline, we can have 2 more daylight hours each day or 2 less, depending on the month of the year. Depending on when we are in the year, we could have 2 more or 2 less. We could have 10 hours of daylight or 14 hours of daylight with an average midline of 12. Okay, the period is 2 daylight. The period. I said period. That should say amplitude. Woo, that's tragic. All right, the amplitude is 2 daylight hours, which means that there can be 2 hours of daylight more or less than the midline of 12. And it's called midline. It could be called average. It could be vertical shift. It could be a lot of things. Okay, so we're going to, again, pretend like we don't have any of these numbers here. So if they ever ask you, and they will, if they ever ask you, hey, what's the maximum? Hey, what's the minimum? And that type of thing, then without this information, here's easily how you would find it. So the maximum number of daylight hours is going to be your midline, and then you would go up to, because that is your amplitude, so 14 hours. Your minimum, and all this can happen in your head, but I just want to give you a visual for it. So the minimum, even though I know it's 10, they told me it's 10. Well, they didn't say this was the minimum, but we can tell from the graph. The average, the midline, vertical shift is 12, but we can have 2 less than that, so 10 hours. So if they ever ask for a maximum and minimum, that's a good way of getting it. Okay, so let's go back up here. And terrible, tragic mistake when I said period, it was amplitude. Let's figure out what the period of this is. And once I find out what the period of this is, it's going to make so much sense again. So period is always 2 pi divided by b. b in this case is pi over 6. So 2 pi divided by pi over 6. So cancel your pi's if you like. I think I will, actually. I'm going to grab this green pen that has not behaved for me very well lately. And we're going to cancel out the pi's. So that cancels with that one. It goes in one time. Come on, green pen. Work with me now. And that's going to give me 2 over 1/6. Well, when you do 2 divided by 1/6, you really have 2 times 6 over 1. So 12. 12 what? 12 months. That makes so much sense. That's a year. The period is 12 months because at the end of 12 months, the year's over and the whole cycle starts again.